learned almost all the grammar there is to know in Latin, so we're going to spend the next couple weeks on just some short bits and pieces of things, and we're going to look at fearing clauses right now. Now, there's a short summary of fearing clauses in your chart book in the dependent subjunctive page, so that will be helpful this week in your homework. All right, I'm going to give you a fearing clause in English. I am afraid that you will miss the plane. Here's the fearing clause underline. And this is called a positive fearing clause. I'll tell you why in a second. The next one is I fear that you will not arrive on time, and that's called a negative fearing clause. You can probably already see why. Positive does not have a not. A negative clause has a not. So in Latin, a positive clause is introduced by a ne, and ne is translated as that. And in Latin, the negative clause is introduced by an ut or a ne non, which is that ... not. Okay, so let's look at one. Now, I am afraid that it may happen. If we're going to translate that into Latin, here we have the beginning of that. So it's the beginning of our clause, that it may happen. Okay. So timeo, I am afraid, and then we have our ne, that it may happen. Literally, may it not happen, but I'm afraid that it may. So it's positive. Okay, I'm afraid that you may not live. You already see the not here, so you're going to tell us that that's going to be a negative fearing clause. So we're going to introduce it by an ut or ne non, and in this time we've introduced it by an ut. So timeo ut vivas. Oh, that you may live, but I'm afraid that you may not. So that makes it a negative. All right, so fear clauses. The key to fear clauses is that they're introduced by a verb of fearing. Do you see it all here? I'm afraid, I fear, I'm afraid. So introduced by a verb of fearing. And the subjunctive verb in the fear clause, yes, it has a subjunctive verb. It follows the sequence of tenses. So let's look at an entire sentence here. Right, from the Latin. So remember, they have a verb of fearing. Here we go, timet, fearing, right? Here's the entire phrase. Orator timet ne argumentum senatui non persuadiat. Now, that's a negative, and we see it's a negative right away because it's got in the fear clause a ne and a non along with the verb. So it's negative. So the orator fears that his evidence may not persuade the Senate. So if you look in the verb in the main clause, it's in the present tense, which puts it in the primary sequence. And if you look, the subjunctive verb is also in the present, so it's in the primary sequence. So they're both in the present, and that's why we translate it that way. Okay, next one. Nautai metuerunt. Again, we're afraid. Has a fearing verb, ne aqualatera navis perfunderet. And it's a positive because it's just a ne, there's no non in the sentence, okay? So the verb meterunt in the main clause is in the perfect tense. So that puts it in the secondary sequence. And although remember in translating perfect and imperfect are interchangeable, so since the action in the fear clause is after the time of the main clause, the whole would pour over, the subjunctive is in the imperfect, right? It's happened. I afraid the water would pour over. It hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen after. It's going to happen after, right? So it's would pour over. So now one in English. The artisan fears, so here we have, and this is in the present tense, right? The artisan fears that, here's our whole sequence, that the obelisk will not please the king. And remember, we know that this stops here at the verb, and it is a complete sentence by itself. We also know that it's negative because there's a not in it. So it's going to be introduced by a ne. We've got our ne here and a non right before the verb. All right. Now, the verb in the main clause is in the primary sequence as it is in the present tense. You can use timet or weretur or metuit, so it's in the present tense. And so there is not a future subjunctive. So it's, even though we say will not in the English, there's not a future subjunctive. So in place of the future, we use the present subjunctive in a fear clause. So just make a note of that. So then we would use present subjunctive here as well. So artifacts timet veriter metuit ne obeliscus, that the obelisk will not please non placiat the king, regi. That's all there is to it. It's pretty simple. You just have to know what to look for. By now you should know your sequence of tenses. The verb of fearing should be a clue, and as well the ne or the ut or ne non.